Beyond the 1,000 people in this room, there are hundreds more attending this event in the Air Force One Pavilion, watching it on a big screen. So I want to welcome all of them as well. You know, I also found it fascinating. I had a chance to stand next to Mark during his book signing and to hear the number of places that this audience has come from is just amazing. You know, we of course have our great neighbors from Thousand Oaks and Moore Park and Simi Valley, but you have come from as far as San Diego, Fresno, San Francisco, Colorado, Virginia, Texas, Arizona, Calgary, Canada, Pennsylvania, Washington, D.C., Hawaii, Idaho, Florida. We even had a veteran that I know Mark was honored to meet that fought on Iwo Jima. Is that terrific or what? This audience is also quick on its feet. I say that because you set another record in another regard. The event sold out in just under 21 minutes. Obviously, that is quite a tribute to Mark, whom we have come to know at the Reagan Library as a very special friend. In fact, he was here very quietly a few months ago with his dad, Jack, and his entire family, dedicating a portrait of Ronald Reagan that was painted by his father, and it hangs in the lobby right outside this room. It's a terrific addition here to the Reagan Library. Mark, thank you for bringing your dad out here. So all this excitement over Mark's appearance is a given. He is one of the most listened to radio talk show hosts in the United States. And with the publication of Ameritopia, which follows right on the heels of the hugely successful Liberty and Tyranny, he continues his streak as being one of the nation's best-selling authors as well. For the 7th week in a row, Ameritopia has made the New York Times bestseller list. We also claim Mark as one of our own here at the library because in addition to a love for our 40th president, Ronald Reagan, and all that he stood for, Mark is actually a Reagan alum. He served as an advisor to several members of President Reagan's cabinet, the Associate Director of Presidential Personnel, a Deputy Assistant Secretary of Education, Deputy Solicitor of the Department of the Interior, and ultimately as Chief of Staff to a great American Attorney General, Ed Meese. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the great one, Mark Levin. My brother.
Thank you, babe.
Okay, so we thought rather than let Mark give a boring speech, we would have a conversation, and you're going to join in on this after I get my shot at him. So, Mark, first, welcome to the Reagan Library.
Couldn't you put more books out here?
Nah, we sold all the rest. So, you know.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
I'll start with, you know, when you wrote Liberty and Tyranny, you sold over 1 million books. I think 1.2 million and counting. Huge number. It was just a huge success. And now you've written another. I know you haven't written the other because you need the money. Why the reason for the follow-on?
How do you know that?
Why another book?
Well, you know, you can't put everything in one book. And Liberty and Tyranny was really a restatement of conservatism and non-conservatism, a reintroduction of it. Because honestly, I felt that the Republican Party had turned into kind of mush, and I thought it was important with what the left was doing in this country to remind people of conservatism, why it's so magnificent, why it embraces liberty and private property rights and the rule of law and individual sovereignty and all these things that have made America so great. And yet, on the other hand, the left, which is constantly trying to centralize and concentrate power, and how much damage has been done in the last 100 years. So, you know, it's kind of tough to do that in 250 pages, which I did. And then I thought to myself later, I really haven't gotten to the nub of this thing. That is, what is this force that lures millions and millions of people to it and then destroys their independence? And it's so, and the politicians who push it are so effective in their propaganda. And the phony intellectuals who push it are so effective in the arguments they make. Where does this come from? Kind of when did it start? And I felt that had to be addressed if we're going to really, in my view, save the country. The other point is, well, where did our views come from? You know, we talk about property rights and these other things. Well, where did they come from? The founders didn't wake up one day and suddenly think about consent of the governed, 3 branches of government. Where does this stuff come from? So it comes from a lot of places, but I decided to focus in on a few of those places as well. And so I've concluded that the problem we have is this utopian statism. You can hear it today, where politicians get up and they say, I'm going to create a program, and I'm going to fix the mortgage situation. No, they're not going to fix the mortgage situation. I'm going to create a program, and incomes are going to be equalized. No, they're not going to be equalized. I'm going to create a program, and I'm going to do something else. And all you have to do is surrender more and more of your liberty and more of your assets and more of who you are, and somehow they're going to continue, they're going to fix the situation. Where does this come from, this ideology? Now, the problem is that these notions of utopianism aren't utopian at all, really. These are notions of, these are fantasies. And the idea I felt when I started this, that the greatest country on the face of the earth, which has created more wealth for more people than any society ever, more liberty for more people than any society ever, is such a civil society because our Constitution is such a magnificent document. Why would we surrender these things on these fantasies and these hopes and these claims? So basically, that's why I wrote this book.
You know, you mentioned the word statism, and if there's a word out of liberty and tyranny that you have successfully, I think, brought back into the American lexicon, that's it, statism. Now, define a meritopia for me.
Well, I got to thinking, after I go through a lot of the philosophers, this is a book basically on political philosophy. And then at the end, it all comes together. I tie it all together. And the bottom line was, I got to thinking, and I ended Liberty and Tyranny this way, we're not really a federal republic anymore because the states that gave the central government its birth now live at its behest. We're not really a constitutional republic in many respects because so much of our government is now rote. That is, we've got this massive bureaucracy. Doesn't matter who's elected, it just keeps operating and consuming and regulating no matter who you vote for. And it's not really a representative republic anymore in that respect either. So I thought, well, what is it? Well, it's not the America that the founders founded. It's something else. And I think I came up with the name Ameritopia. And I don't know where we're going with this. I don't think anybody knows where we're going with it. But there are aspects of tyranny that a lot of people don't feel, but a lot of people do feel. For instance, if you're a farmer today, you're being put upon like never before by the Environmental Protection Agency. If you're a rancher today, you're being put upon today like never before by the Interior Department. We've got private property owners under attack all over this country. We've got businesses, small businesses too, under attack in every direction. And it's getting much and much and much worse. And then we hear these politicians talk about you got to have skin in the game. And I think to myself, skin in the game. Is that what we were founded for, to have skin in the game? No. We were founded for them to make sure that our liberty is protected, not for us to give skin in the game for the bureaucrats and the politicians. So basically, the title, in one word, I said, I got to figure out one word that kind of explains it, and then explain it more in the book, and that's Ameritopia, a mix between America and this utopianism. Now, let me say this. You don't have to clap every time I give an answer. I mean, you can give a standing ovation if you want. But it's not necessary. Yeah. But whatever you want. Yeah.
You know, I have to confess, the first half of the book, I'm reading through it, and I'm like, my gosh, it felt like a professor was taking me through a course on political philosophy. That's sections you wrote where it was, let me define for you the very origins of utopianism and the origins of liberty and the clash of the ideas and the rest of that. I mean, you took a really scholarly approach to this, and my question is why did you feel for, like, you know, your average reader it was so necessary to get that deep and to really go to the roots of the various philosophies?
Because I think my audience is smarter than most audiences. That's number one. And number two, if we're going to understand what's happening to us, then we really need to understand what's happening to us. I mean, if I just say, oh, that guy's a liberal, look what he wants to do, great. So if you saw my dining room table is stacked with books on philosophy from 100 different philosophers. And in the end, I got down to 4, Plato and the Republic, and Thomas More and Utopia, and Thomas Hobbes and Leviathan, and Marx and Engels and the Communist Manifesto. Some of these books are fairly complicated, particularly in their translations. If you notice in my book, not one of them is more than 20 or 25 pages. I get right down to the nub of it. But I let them speak for themselves also. The bottom line is, Plato's Republic, the Ayatollah Khomeini references it as one of the things that drove him toward the type of society that he created, which is, of course, a genocidal theocracy in Iran. And what Plato does in the Republic, and he has his defenders. People say, oh, you're not reading it right, you don't understand. That's fine. But in the Republic, one of the things they do is they want to control health care. And they want to control health care because they want to control the population. And the oldest of the old and the frailest of the frail and the most ill among them are supposed to accept the fact that death is an honorable thing under certain circumstances, so society can flourish and so forth. And also the whole notion of philosopher kings is in the Republic, and much, much more. And then when you look at Thomas More and Utopia, Thomas More's Utopia, many people argue it was a fiction, and that's the problem. Communism, in many respects, is based on this utopian notion of radical egalitarianism. And so there we have pretty much the attempt at equal incomes, the attempt at phony representative government, and isolationism. You know, it's a peninsula, they turn it into an island. People who've been in the urban areas, after a while they're pushed out forcibly, if necessary, into the farming areas. And, you know, you think about Mao, you think about these other folks who were doing this sort of thing. I'm just giving you a thumbnail. Then you move into Thomas Hobbes' Leviathan, the whole social compact theory, except in his case, I believe the Leviathan is this monstrous centralized sovereign that treats the people like subjects, not like citizens. And they enter into this and they can't get out, this arrangement. And he thought that people on their own are nasty, brutish, and there's a famous quote of his. And so they need to be controlled by a benevolent mastermind. And then finally, of course, the Communist Manifesto, which is really trash. But basically, they create this straw man of these two classes, the landowners and the laborers, and never shall the two meet, and that the laborers need to destroy the landowners, destroy society, destroy religion, destroy any remnants of what's in existence. And once they do that, eventually the state withers away, and I guess we have San Francisco 1960. I don't know what we have. Awful lot of people have died and been brutalized under these different theories, and yet this whole notion of soft tyranny and centralized government and all these other things, these come out of this sort of thinking, this utopianism type thinking. And you can hear it in our politicians today. Every week they have a new program that's not going to work, a new program that costs a fortune, a new program where the government gets bigger and more powerful and issues regulations. And the biggest problem here is that utopianism and constitutionalism can't work together. You have to destroy the Constitution because of all of its limits. And I don't mean to be long-winded here, but the book requires some explanation. The Founding Fathers fully understood the notion of utopianism. They were familiar with Plato's Republic, and they were familiar with Hobbes and More, and not the Communist Manifesto, that came later, but they were familiar with these, what I call these mastermind attempts at creating these perfect societies, these ideal societies, and they completely rejected them because they understood that human beings are imperfect. So that doesn't make a handful of human beings perfect. They're imperfect too. So that's why they developed the Constitution the way that they did.
Let's spin the clock forward from Plato to relatively modern America, and you have a chapter in your book, and you go into some length about Roosevelt, the 30s and 40s, and the New Deal. And the more I read it, the more I got concerned, because it felt to me like maybe this last 3 years has been an attempt at a New Deal. Is there any truth to that, you think?
Well, let me move back just a little bit. If you look at our Constitution, everybody knows it's broken into 3 branches. When you look at the debates at the Constitutional Convention, what we call the Anti-Federalists, and when you look at the ratification debates afterwards, the Anti-Federalists too, they were not happy with this 3 division, and even though each division, the legislative, the judicial, and the executive, were not given plenary power. They're given enumerated powers. So you can't just legislate about anything. You have to legislate about these things. You can't just be an executive and have all the executive power you want. You have executive power to do these things. The judiciary is barely even defined. So our founding fathers, our framers in particular, they were very concerned about this notion of a centralized government with consolidated power. They were familiar with these works that I referred to and more, and they just fought a revolution. And during the ratification debates in the states, the Constitution almost didn't make it. They had problems in some, including Massachusetts. John Adams was twisting arms to get it passed. The South, Virginia, started to rise up. Pennsylvania was a big problem. So they had to agree to these amendments. They had to agree that if the Constitution is ratified by the states, 3/4 of the states, then, or in this case, almost 3/4 of the states, then the first Congress would put out these 12 amendments, send it to the states, and the states would either ratify or not. And 2 of the most important amendments were the 11th and 12th Amendment, which became the 9th and 10th Amendments in the Bill of Rights. The 9th Amendment talking about individual authority, sovereignty, and the 10th Amendment talking about state sovereignty. The Constitution would never have been ratified without those promises of those amendments, and those amendments were really taken from George Mason and the Virginia Declaration of Rights, and those were taken from John Locke earlier on, which we can talk about later if anybody cares. But anyway, so the bottom line was this. It was crucial to the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists that the central government be very limited, and these are the things it can do. It was crucial that the states retain the rest of their sovereignty. And it was crucial that the interpretation of the Constitution be viewed through the Ninth Amendment, and that is holding up the individual as something that has value and worth and is to be protected. So you have to attack the Constitution, you have to dismantle it in order to push for a centralized government with this concentrated power, this utopian statism, I call it. And among the first, although not the first, but among the most prominent advocates of this was Woodrow Wilson. And Woodrow Wilson, and I went back and looked at his writings before he became president when he was at Princeton, and Woodrow Wilson makes it very clear. He dismisses the unalienable rights line and concept in the Declaration of Independence, which is the essence of our founding. He says the Constitution cannot possibly be divided this way, with one, in essence, body part organ fighting with another body part organ. So he basically said that the federal government and the different branches have to do whatever they have to do to bring authority within the federal government. FDR agreed with that. And FDR relied on a number of phony experts, including a Columbia professor, who said that you must attack individualism, you must attack American individualism, or otherwise this whole notion of community and consolidation can never occur. This is a long way of answering your question. The New Deal was clearly an attack on our constitutional system. If these programs are so wonderful, and if the people want them so overwhelmingly, then we have a process for adopting them. It's called the amendment process to the Constitution. But the way it works now is the federal government, the different branches, it's like an ongoing constitutional convention where, oh, you got Obamacare. Oh, what's the authority for that? Well, who cares? Pass the law. You know, cap and trade, same thing. So what's going on today comes down to two words, and they're not my two words: fundamental transformation. Those are Obama's words. And I asked a couple of questions. When you look at the Constitution and the power of the president, does the president have the power to fundamentally transform America? Of course not. And why would you want to fundamentally transform America? That means you don't like America very much, do you? That means you don't like capitalism, private property rights very much. That means you don't like our constitutional system very much. When you keep hearing this fundamental transformation, change is hard, we need more time for change, you need to understand this is a direct attack on our constitutional system. That's what he's talking about, that's what he means. Did I answer your question?
Yep.
I don't even remember what it was.
Okay, so...
You know I'm a radio host, right? Just to make sure.
Go! What is the... so what would you say is, if I said, you have to name the number one thing that you think in the last several years has robbed us more of our liberty and drives this country more towards a meritopia than anything else, what would it be?
There's no question what it is. It's Obamacare. And the reason is Obamacare is about health insurance, but it's about more than that. It's about the final nail in the coffin of the constitutional system. You look at Obamacare. Obamacare is an attack on the Commerce Clause. The purpose of the Commerce Clause was to promote commerce between the states. Not to kill commerce, not to kill competition. It'd be called the Anti-Commerce Clause. But that's the Commerce Clause, was to promote private property rights, trade, and commerce, because New Jersey and Pennsylvania were fighting with each other. They were all blocking each other on the rivers and so forth, saying, we got to fix this. So the Commerce Clause was pro-trade, pro-commerce. The Commerce Clause, the notion that the Commerce Clause could be used by Congress to compel individuals to do something against their will or their best interests, and then in particular, to force a person to enter into a private contract with a private company. The private company's forced to offer a policy that it doesn't want to offer, and the individual's forced to pay for it, and the company's forced to provide it. That is so absurd. That's so antithetical to our founding. And of course, as all of you here know, that will be the end, because then the government can force us to do all kinds of things that we don't want to do, and that will be the precedent for it. But Obamacare does more than that. You saw the recent attack on the Catholic Church and other people of faith and so forth. Why do we have to, in this country, compel every single insurance provider to provide free contraceptives? We don't have to. The status quo today is that they don't. And yet, is it really that hard to get a condom? I mean, I'm just saying, it's really not that hard to get a condom. I mean, most public schools are handing them out like lollipops or something, so it's not that big. And isn't it interesting that that's what they study? Not cancer treatment, not diabetes treatment, not heart disease, but that. But that aside, that attacks the whole notion of the free exercise of religion. And even more than that, it attacks private property rights, because maybe the company, and even more than that, it attacks individual liberty, because maybe I don't want to subsidize something for free for somebody else, let them pay for it themselves, and the government doesn't have the power to tell me that I must. There is one thing I want to mention on this, and this is this notion of tyranny. You know, Alexis de Tocqueville talked about this, and he's not the only one. Jefferson did, Frederick Bastiat, all these. You can have tyranny through democracy. In other words, for instance, if our Congress is doing things outside the Constitution just because it's decided it can do it, that's tyranny. It's tyranny by Congress, but it's still tyranny. The idea that individuals can vote to steal somebody's wealth because somebody wants to redistribute it, that's tyranny. You'll notice we don't have a direct democracy, a pure democracy in our Constitution. There's checks and balances. There's all kinds of things in there to limit the scope and the power of the federal government and to make sure that individuals can't. The reason we enter into a government is to protect our bodies and our private property. Otherwise, there's no reason to enter into a relationship, a social contract with government. The problem now is the government is using its power and the law to attack them. And so, to plunder, as Bastiat would say. So this is one of the puzzles that we face as a people, among others. What do you do about a situation like this? And even if you win elections, and we must, but even if we win elections, are these the kind of politicians that have such an understanding of the dire situation in this country? And it's even more than financial, it's constitutional, that they're going to take steps necessary to begin to reverse course. And let me tell you something, it's going to have to be a person of enormous courage, because the utopian state is dug in. It's got hundreds of thousands of bureaucrats. It's got a massive amount of money. It's got the big media on its side. It's got all the most of the universities and colleges on its side. So it is a formidable, daunting undertaking, and yet it's an undertaking we must take because we don't really have any choice.
Yeah. Well, okay, so along those lines, I did some math, and you got here at about 1 o'clock today. And in that time, the federal debt has increased by $1 billion between that moment and now.
Is that California or the whole country?
That's the whole country. So it's about $150 million an hour. Okay. So
$150 million an hour?
Mm-hmm. And so now the federal debt is nearing the 16 trillion mark, right? So the question I have for you is, given we're all slaves in one way, shape, or form, whether it's us or the next generation or the one after, to this incredible debt that we're piling up, isn't it over? I mean, in some respects, having a debt of that size that's driving us towards utopia.
We're in utopia. The question is, how far do we want to go down this path, and where is it going to take us? I had Thomas Sowell, the great Dr. Thomas Sowell, on my program this week, Wednesday. And I said, my last question to him was, Dr. Sowell, are we going to be a constitutional republic in 10 or 20 or 30 years or what? And he said, and I'm speaking for myself, not the Reagan Library, and he said, if we lose the next election, we're not. If you talk to Walter Williams, he says, it's over. I guess what I'm saying is, if you listen to Ronald Reagan, and this is the place to listen to him, and he's my last quote in the book, and I always turn to him for some optimism. Not Pollyanna phony optimism, but optimism. And he says in the first inauguration in January 1981, and I paraphrase, he said, these things are not inevitable. We can take steps to try and begin to turn them around. But if we don't, then they are inevitable. And that's right. There are some plans out there, whether it's Paul Ryan or DeMint and Rand Paul and others, that are serious efforts to start the process, to begin the process of gradually unraveling this. I don't know if the American people, you see, here's the problem. And I've said this on the air. Have too many Americans surrendered to this? Have too many Americans been conquered by this? Bought off by it through entitlements? Are there too many malcontents out there who are just always attacking the system because they're incapable of providing for themselves? Are there too many Pollyannas out there blissfully living their lives and allowing other people to control what happens to them? Or are there still enough of us who believe in the American spirit and still enough of us who have the old American mindset and psychology? In other words, do we outnumber them or do they outnumber us? And we're going to find out pretty damn soon. And the bottom line is this. One election can't reverse the course, but one election can pull us over the edge. It's much harder to build a society and to nurture traditions and institutions that man has known for thousands of years. It's much harder to do that than it is to destroy them. You can destroy them in one presidency. The notion that we sit here wondering if the Supreme Court, if one justice on the Supreme Court is going to uphold that individual mandate in other parts of Obamacare or not, tells you how much this society is in decline. One Supreme Court justice should not be able to make that decision, and yet he can or she can. Think about this. A temporary Congress, a Congress that doesn't even exist anymore. The Congress that came in with Obama with supermajorities in the Senate and the House. They rammed through Obamacare against the will of the American people. That Congress is gone. Their dirty work remains because they try to institutionalize their activities through the bureaucracy, which is working full-time right now to put this in place to counter any future election. That's what they're up to. They're trying to get the courts. You only really need one justice, is my guess, my prediction. They're trying to get the courts to give their stamp of approval. And so one Congress, one group of temporary politicians will have forever and fundamentally changed this nation. That is what the Constitution was conceived to stop. We didn't just get here today. This has been going on a long time, but we're at the point now where the hour is late. That's the point that Sol's making, Walter Williams making, anybody with their head screwed on right is making. You're not giving out hemlock tonight, are you, by the way? That's what I thought. I mean, if anything, this should get you worked up. Because I'm going to tell you something. The idea that we, this generation of Americans, is going to surrender the greatest nation on the face of the earth to this people is mind-boggling to me. The idea, we have a man here who fought at Iwo Jima, as did my grandfather. The idea that we have men and women in uniform who have fought against enemies, foreign enemies, to protect this society. The idea that we defeated Hitler and Tojo and Mussolini. The idea that we fought a civil war to free the black people from slavery. The idea that this nation and all the blood that's come and all the blood that's gone and all the men and women who've died to preserve it that we, this generation, that we're going to sit on our asses and let these people take this country is beyond my imagination.
Okay. Okay, so...
Do you know how many audio bites they have on me? That's not going to work.
Well, last question for me, then we're going to go to the audience. But it's a good lead-in from what you just said. So what can the average American do about this?
Well, the average American can take their children and their grandchildren and instill in them the American spirit, to speak out in the classroom when they have some Marxist know-nothing, whether they're a teacher in public school or college or university, and challenge them. I did it as a kid, and let the chips fall where they may. It's time to stand up. It's time for young people to understand that this generation is destroying this country, and that despite the fact that our political leaders, whatever they call themselves, these political leaders are out there talking about how they're taking care of them with the student loans and all the rest. Those political leaders are destroying them. This debt is so massive. This debt, when you consider the entitlements as well as you talked about $16 trillion, the debt's over $100 trillion when you include everything. Our economy produces $15 trillion in value every year. That debt's never going to be paid back. It's impossible. And if we continue along this road, what Sol and Williams and even Ryan is saying, we have 2 years, what they're saying is there is a point of no return when the system collapses. And when the system collapses, the civil society collapses. And when the civil society collapses, all the things that you take for granted, people generally being respectful to people generally reaching out to other people, all that goes. You'll see violence in the streets, you'll see other things going on, which you start to see in Greece and these other places. I mean, it's all there for us to see. Greece, Portugal, Spain, Europe. I mean, they have a head start on their demise, and all we do is look at it. But the answer is your families, your friends, your neighbors, your coworkers, educate them, and as fast as you can. And here's the good news. I've been involved in politics for 40 years in one way or another. I worked on Reagan's 76 and 80 campaigns. I worked in his administration for 8 years. The fact of the matter is, I have never seen so many people quoting and waving around the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. Many of you, 10 years ago, you never gave it a second thought. Now I bet it's at the front of your minds. And it is with tens of millions of us. The fact of the matter is, tens of millions of us love this country. We don't want it fundamentally transformed. So we have to get to as many other people as we can, wake them up, educate them. The truth is, and I'm not trying to pat myself on the back, that's the purpose of this book. That's the purpose of Liberty and Tyranny. I consider it part of the purpose of my radio program, as do a number of my brothers and sisters in broadcasting, which is why we're under attack all the time by these utopian statists. The fact of the matter is, we have a good message. Liberty is a good message. Private property rights, it's a good message. Constitutionalism is a good message. What do they have? Fantasies, phony paradises, coercion. They create misery. I mean, all they ever say is we need to spend more. We need to create more. The government needs to get bigger and bigger. Unemployment, now over 8%. They're applauding today that it's 8.3%. That is unheard of. It's 36 months in a row of over 8% unemployment. It's never happened before, or since the Great Depression anyway, but I don't know that it's ever happened. Look at the housing market. It's a disaster, again, because of the Community Reinvestment Act, more government social engineering. These masterminds don't know what they're doing, but they won't stop. And not only won't they stop, they can demand more and more authority. They are fanatics. And even when you argue with them on facts, they don't want to hear the facts. Even when you show them experience, they don't want to know about experience. When you tell them that their science is phony, when you tell them that they're not using knowledge, they accuse you of that. But what they are doing is pushing a fanaticism. They're pushing a dogma, a religion of sorts, if you will, and they're not going to be talked out of it. So we have to talk more and more Americans into our position and make sure that we vote. And even then, it may not work, but we got to give it a try.
Yeah. We're going to take questions from the audience. If I could just ask you one favor. We have staff that are roaming the aisles that have microphones, so if you raise your hand, they'll get a microphone to you. If you just wait till you get the microphone to ask your question, and introduce yourself, and we'll go from there. So do we have one over here? Yeah, right here.
My name's Wendy Randall. My question to you is, why are the Republican nominees not taking your rhetoric, using your rhetoric, or creating their own rhetoric to address all these issues rather than attack one another? When it's more important that they address the issues that you just addressed with us here this evening.
Why are they attacking each other and not getting into these issues? I think they're doing both, but the attacks are so constant and that the other part's getting lost. And I regret that they're doing it because, look, I'm not an idealist, I'm a realist. I know why one candidate has to spend millions to tear down the others. He thinks that's his way to the nomination. The problem is we have a beautiful opportunity right now with very smart men running, all of whom can be discussing these things at length everywhere they go and not be distracted by, well, gee, did he pay taxes in 1974 and did this one do that? And who gives a damn? I don't really care. The fact of the matter is that we have got to persuade the American people to our point of view. Or it's over. Well, in the end, the American people will decide what kind of country they want to have. Benjamin Franklin said it in his speech on the last day of the Constitutional Convention. He was so ill, he wrote it, and he gave it to James Wilson, a fellow delegate from Pennsylvania, to read. And at the end of the speech, what Franklin says, and I paraphrase again, look, the Constitution will work for a period of time, but then the people will decide if they want to live under despotism or not. And if they want to live under despotism, then they deserve it. You have to keep in mind, these men who are berated and smeared by the left all the time, the framers of the Constitution, after the Revolutionary War was over, they could have done what's done in so many countries, taken power, or appointed a king. If George Washington wanted to be king, he probably would have been king. They were constantly concerned about restraining power, including their own, because they understood the notion of liberty. So, to answer your question is, we have what we have, they say what they say, and we cannot rely on politicians to do the work that we need to do. Now, we need to get the right politicians in office to stop the others and to at least begin the process. But we have got to reacquaint the American people, or a lot of American people, with their heritage. That's what we have to do. And so the more you arm yourselves with information, this is a perfect place. The Reagan Library, Hillsdale College, my books, other people's books, that sort of thing. The more you inform yourself, the better you're going to be a Patrick, as I say, Patrick Henry, and a Patricia Henry.
Very good. Over here.
Mark, thank you for being a mensch.
Well, thank you for that. Where are you? Hearing voices.
To your left.
Over here, Mark. Just over here.
My question is, I would feel that if I were Madison or Jefferson or Montesquieu or Locke, and I'd look around at what's going on around me, and I see the government lie to me, and I see the media lie to me constantly, relentlessly, I don't know what they would do. My thought is every politician should say, I'm running against two people, the Democrat there, and I'm running against you, the media. You lie to the public, here are the facts. If I'm wrong, then you tell me that I shouldn't be a politician and I shouldn't be running. But if I'm right, I want the people to question you too, and not just my opponent. What do you think?
I've said something similar to that. They should run against the media and their opponents. But look, woulda, coulda, shoulda. They are what they are. I come out of Pennsylvania. The Republican Party was a weak, mush party, like in so many states. And conservatives need to take these parties over as a practical matter, and they need to do it, and they need to do it fast. That you have to have a party that is as resolute and aggressive for the cause of constitutionalism as you have a party that's as resolute and aggressive against the cause of constitutionalism. The left never gives up. Our guys keep telling us why they can't do things. The left never gives up. And I'm not going to use the forum here at the Reagan Library to give my opinion about the Republican leadership in Congress. If you listen to the show, you know exactly what I think. I've never seen such timid... I just said I wasn't going to do this. I'm a guest. I'm a guest. Guests don't do that sort of thing. But to answer your question, I think what Madison and Jefferson and those fellows would say is, well, of course politicians lie. That's why we told you not to give them so much power. That's why we divided up the government. That's why we enumerated authority. That's why we have all these states out there. If politicians were great, we wouldn't need to divide up power. We wouldn't need to enumerate authority. We wouldn't need all these states. We'd have a president like we have today. I'm going to tell you from my point of view, again, speaking for myself as always, not at least right now, we need to plug the hole. Now, what that means to me is whoever the nominee is, and I've said before, if it's an orange juice can, that's fine by me. This first has to be stopped so we can take a breath, take a look at all the damage that's been done along the horizon, begin the process of unraveling this, dig deep into the bureaucracies, and find all these little appointees and yank them out, eliminate most of these regulations, which are onerous, which are destructive of individuals and their private property, and we've got to begin that process. That process cannot begin with this administration. And I want to tell you something else. I also think Jefferson and Madison and Washington would say, you don't live in our constitutional republic anymore. And they'd be right. So, I want to play along and go along with the rest of the team. I want to say everything's going to be okay. We just have to win one election. And it's not true. It's just not true when you look at this. And people who are honest intellectually about it, who've looked at these things for most of their lives, as I have, as these other gentlemen I mentioned have, we know what's going on. Alexis de Tocqueville talked about a soft tyranny. That doesn't mean everybody in America feels it right now, but there are Americans feeling it right now. If you produce things, you feel it right now. If you work for energy companies, you feel it right now. If you work for healthcare companies, you feel it right now. If you work for coal companies, you feel it right now. If you're a small business trying to get underway with all these HR rules that are being unloaded on, you're starting to feel it right now. So, and by the way, one of the last places that feels it is where I am close, a couple miles away, is Hollywood. They don't feel any of it. So it takes very, very courageous men and women in Hollywood, in my humble opinion, to stand up to this sort of thing, not only because of the atmosphere there, but because they do not experience the sort of thing that's being experienced throughout the rest of the country when somebody tries to open a business or keep one open, or when somebody's trying to, even a trucker. I get Teamsters calling me saying that this is crazy. I mean, I get, you know, you've heard them, all kinds of people telling me how they're going out of business and so forth. There is definitely a fundamental transformation going on, and I think it's going to take ultimately 50 years to undo it, but in 2, 3, 4, 5 years, if the American people elect this brand of leadership, it can't be undone. How do you undo it? So I tell you this, not to depress you, I tell you this to energize you. You have a reason to get up in the morning, a reason to get involved, a reason to do all these things that you need to do as an activist citizen. And you know, that phrase, it's always darkest before the dawn. How do you think they felt during the American Revolution, dragging on for 8.5 years? How do you think they felt during any one of the battles in the Civil War? How do you think they felt during World War II when they were facing down the worst forms of genocidal maniacs? How do you think they felt? Well, we have known none of those dangers. But we have a job to do, which is in many ways more complicated, because it's occurring within our country. The instrumentalities of the government and the law are being twisted and used against us exactly how Woodrow Wilson and FDR and others wanted them to be. So it's like Batman, if you accept what's going on, I mean accept the fact of it going on, not accept the result, you'll be in a much better position and motivated to do something about it in a legal and legitimate and political way.
Up here in the balcony.
Don't jump!
Thank you, Mr. Levin, first off. I'm a high school sophomore. Every morning we, the very few in the class, say the Pledge of Allegiance to our gorgeous flag, and most of the students mock it openly. Others sit quietly, but it disgusts me to see these kids make jokes out of it, plays on words, and laugh at it and enjoy it. And it just makes me want to throw up. And I want to know how I can, in some way, influence these people and be an influence on other people to share the greatness of the country and undo what's been done to disrespect our flag and teach people what is coming out in their actions.
Everybody in here is proud of you. I'm going to tell you that. That's number one. And you're smarter than every one of those kids who sit on their hands or mock the flag. Let me tell you something. I can't even tell you how many men and women throughout our history have died just making sure that flag was held up in battle. It disgusts me too. You look at that Iwo Jima monument, what those men were doing there. That's just one example. It happened thousands and thousands and thousands of times. Men carrying the American flag, even in the Civil War, they were the targets. They were shot first if they couldn't get the general or the commander and so forth. Same during the Revolutionary War when they held the flag of the various colonies or of the new country. All out throughout Europe it occurred, and they sit there and smugly mock and laugh. Let me tell you something. I don't know how we fix that, but maybe you can pull one or two of them aside and educate them. One or two at a time. That's the best way to do it. I often say on the radio that I'm here educating one liberal at a time. The truth is, I'm probably not educating any of them. And that's why I've concluded that there are people out there, I call the dug-in types the drones, because there's nothing we can do or say that's going to convince them of anything. Those people must be defeated. And so the way you defeat them is to get to the other people who aren't paying attention or who are not engaged and who have some kind of an open mind or an open attitude about these things. And that's what you do. You find out if there's a couple kids in the class, and you say, "Can I talk to you?" and have a little chat with them. Do you know how many people died carrying that flag? And if the kid's a loser, move on to another one. There's plenty of kids to talk to.
Mark, on a different subject, but current events are right in our face. Given the situation in the Middle East between Israel and Iran, and mixed signals coming out of the White House from Mr. You-know-who, my question is this: do you feel, as in your opinion, that Prime Minister Netanyahu, one of the greatest leaders the world has ever had, will in fact do what he has to do to protect his people? Do you think he will unilaterally go in, and if so, when, and what would the repercussions be if he does? Thank you.
Well, I spoke to him yesterday. I don't think that country with those people are going to allow another Holocaust. I just don't think there's any way. That is a very powerful, tiny little country that is massively outnumbered and massively outgunned. But I do not think they're going to allow the Islamo nutjobs in Tehran to get a nuclear weapon if they can stop it. The problem is we are not arming them with the arms that they need. These deep penetrating bombs, the type of jets that they need. So not only do they have to figure out where the locations are that they have to hit, they have got to figure out how to get there, what ordnance to use, how to fix the ordnance, change the ordnance, how to get back, then to deal with the massive onslaught that's likely to occur when they're done from the Gaza Strip, from Lebanon, perhaps from the Muslim Brotherhood now in Saudi Arabia. They are surrounded, except for Jordan, which is basically teetering. So what I regret, and really regret in great disgust, is that at a time like this, we have a president sending mixed signals, and I guarantee you, if Ronald Reagan was president of the United States, they wouldn't think twice about continuing with this nuclear arms program. I think Reagan would make it abundantly clear that not only do we stand with Israel, and not only will we give them the weapons they need, we'll use the weapons ourselves if we have to. That's what I think would happen. But no, I can't tell you when this is going to happen or what's going to happen, but I can tell you those people are not going to allow themselves to be annihilated.
Right here.
Rich Wingard. A couple of weeks ago, we lost a great patriot and a person who had tremendous moral courage, Andrew Breitbart, who he understood very clearly that at least since the 60s, if not before, the liberals have been very good at controlling pop culture and defining cool. Do you think conservatism can grab that mantle back from the liberals?
I think we try. You know, I think we have to try everything we possibly can. I love hearing the words that my good friend Andrew Breitbart was strong and courageous, and we ought to do what he does. And then one of my colleagues comes under this enormous attack, and where is everybody? They run for the hills. So I don't know if we can or will, but I know we need to try. And one of the great things he did is he created an institution. There's a lot of young people over there working at Breitbart.com. He's launched a new site. He's got a lot of young people over there who are, I guess I'll call them Breitbart's Army. And they're going to keep at it. We all have our roles in life. And this is what I'm trying to say. Each of you can go back to your community and make a difference. I'm not just saying this. I'm saying it's the only chance we have. We sit there on election night, we say, gee, are people going to be motivated? Are more of them going to turn out than us? We'll do something about it. You're sick of the local Republican Party? Do something about it. Because if the Republican Party doesn't do something about it, I think the Republican Party is going to go the way of the Whig Party at some point. And don't clap yet, because if that happens, then the Democrat Party is going to have power for a very, very long time, because conservatives will be split for a long time. It takes time. And third-party elections have been miserable for the last 100 years. So, to answer your question, there's so much to do, and it becomes overwhelming if you allow it all to pile on. But if you focus in on what you, not the macro, but the micro, what you can do in your home, on your street, with your family, with your neighbors, when you get in debates with them and bring these things up, you're doing what the colonists did before the revolution. That's what you're doing. When you bring these things up and discuss Locke, do you know Locke was the most discussed philosopher before the revolution? You're talking about mountain men. You're talking about some people were educated, many people were not. You're talking about subsistence farmers and that sort of thing. Learning about Locke and Montesquieu, you don't even have to learn a lot. You just have to learn enough, because I'm going to tell you something. There are many people in here, or some, who came with the book saying, said, I was a liberal and I'm not anymore. Are there any of you here? Yes. Well, what happened to those people? Let me tell you something. When you see the light, it's a great thing. When you see the light, seriously, it liberates your mind, doesn't it? All this hate, all this jealousy, all this nonsense, all this I wish that our country... When you understand liberty, when you finally cross over that transom, it is something you're willing to fight for. It's something you're willing to defend. That is the spirit. That's the American spirit. That's the American heritage. And you have a responsibility as a citizen to help save this country. And that's how you have to do it. There's no magic answer. I don't have one. And none exists. And you know, there's also a point at which these politicians we just can't keep settling either. Now, I talked about, in my opinion, the need to defeat, the need to stop the damage, and I think it's particularly crucial in this election cycle. And if the damage is stopped after this election cycle, then I think we, the people, really need to focus on getting statesmen in office. And they're there. They're there. They're Jim DeMints, the Rand Pauls, Marco Rubio's, Ron Johnson's, Mike Lee's. These are young guys. These are new. These are the future, I think. You can look in the House at the Paul Ryans, Michelle Bachmans, and others like that, the Steve Kings, Louis Gohmert. There is a core there. And the fact of the matter is, conservatism is mainstream. Conservatism is constitutionalism. One last thing, I'm long-winded here. What I have been pushing for the last 3 years on my show, with Liberty and Tyranny, with this book, wherever I can, is this notion of constitutional conservatism. Because, you know, people say we need a new program, we need a plan. We have a plan. It's called the Constitution. We have a program. It's called capitalism. We have an idea. It's called liberty. What they have is a mess, bureaucracies, bureaucrats, redistribution of wealth. And when the people understand what a joy liberty is, when they're liberated from all this other nonsense, then it'll be like our founding, and then we'll get our country back. And if they don't, if they expect entitlements, if they can be bought off for a monthly check, then we're done.
Okay. We got time for one last question. Right here.
Mr. Levin, thank you for your time today. My name's Rick Simmons, and I'm an American. And my question is kind of a technical question.
You have your papers?
I do. I have a birth certificate.
I'm not allowed to ask for it. Go ahead.
I have a birth certificate. My question is, I believe one of our problems is we have too many career politicians. And I'd like your thoughts on how do we implement term limits in Congress to eliminate career politicians and get new blood, if you will, into Congress, and new blood that may run for the presidency in the future. So I'd like your thoughts on that.
Well, part of the problem, we have two ways of amending the Constitution. You're talking about term limits, which I agree with, through convention, which I strongly oppose, because I just cannot, what a freak show convention that would be. I don't think we can do better than our founders. And a runaway convention could be a runaway country. So I just am not comfortable with that. And as a young man, I wrote Barry Goldwater a letter, and I said, what's wrong with this convention? I have this letter. And he said, hell no, no to convention. I can't imagine that any group of Americans today can do better than they did. So the other way of amending the Constitution is you need a supermajority vote out of the Congress, 2/3, and then 3/4 by the Senate, by the states. I don't think we're going to get a supermajority of the members of Congress voting to limit their power. And yet, why don't we fight for it? I mean, why don't the left just is at it constantly? Healthcare. They've been at healthcare for 100 years. They got their supermajority, their president, they rammed it home. You know, we have to make some demands on our politicians, too. We have to make some demands on our candidates, too. They call us closed-minded when we do. Well, in hell, we're closed-minded. Who much cares? We have to push our agenda. There's a lot of things that I think need to be done, and I don't want to really give it away because I've thought about a lot of these things. But that said, I like your idea. It's not a new idea, but it is something we had to keep pushing for. And by the way, it's not a magic bullet either. For instance, I think the courts are out of control. And yet here we are, people keep saying, sue them, take it to court. And you go to court and you go, oh my God, all these appointees are against us. And then they institutionalize, from a legal perspective, which is what they seek to do, the left's agenda. So we have to be careful about that too. But there's a lot. Fundamentally, what's happened is what I say. We're not really a constitutional. We adhere to the Constitution in the breach. And the more the people understand that, the more the people understand how dangerous that is, the better chance we have. There's a lot of things that need to be done and could be done. And the biggest problem we have in our country today is virtue. And Charles de Montesquieu made the point. He said, once a republic loses its virtue, it ceases to be a republic. And that is the bottom line. Have our politicians all lost virtue? Have the people lost virtue? Are we prepared to keep plundering one another? These questions are going to be decided in the next round, election cycle, the election cycles after that, and I don't have an answer. But there's a lot of things, there's no reason we should give up on certain constitutional amendments or any of these things and play for the mid-game, the long game, the short game, whatever game we have to play. These are complicated subjects, which is why it takes me a long time to answer one question. Because I try and get into philosophy and a little history and a little economics and a little practical aspects of it too. But I just want to return to one thing when you leave here. You really can be a spokesman for liberty at the dinner table, at the workplace, in your community, and you really can persuade some people. Just imagine if 10 million of us persuade 10 million other people. It can have an incredibly historic impact. So don't think you doing something small is not relevant. It's very relevant. I would just ask you when we leave here, do something. Just do something.
Thank you, Mark.
All right. Thank you. Can I just do one quick thing? I want to thank you all for coming. I know you have better things to do on a Friday night. It is a great honor. I don't do a lot of these events. And I want to thank the people at the Reagan Library. You know, this isn't just a library. I consider this like a national town hall meeting place for people who remember the Reagan Revolution and think we need another. So, thank you very much. Thank you. In a nonpartisan way, of course.
Yeah. Well, speaking of thanks, Mark, we want to give you a gift from the Reagan Foundation and Library, but I think I'd like to make sure we give this gift on behalf of everyone who was so nice to come out tonight, and that is a fellow that you might recognize.
Oh, wow. Thank you very much.
So it is inscribed for Mark Levin, March 9th, 2012. And there's a quote inscribed in it, which is one of the very last lines in Mark's book. And it is a Ronald Reagan quote, and it says, "It is time for us to realize that we are too great a nation to limit ourselves to small dreams." So, Mark, thank you so much.
Thank you, brother. God bless you. We'll do it. We can do it, right? Right, Governor? Thank you.
If I could ask everyone to remain in their seats for just a moment so Mark and his family can exit out this way. And then I know all of you are joining us for dinner, and you'll be heading out the doors this way over to the Air Force One Pavilion, so we'll see you over there. Thanks very much.
Thank you.